Jeb is very much one for looking for bargains on the internet. Now, when he saw a sale from Magic Smoke Industries for their Infernal Robotics, he had to just invest. Now, in this particular case, he had a project in mind which was for this lighting rig, and he wanted a telescopic post for the lighting here in the centre, just to keep the whole thing compact when in transit. But when he unwrapped the telescopic piston and planted atop of the generator, it just didn't look right. And that's because it's upside down. Now, if you look very, very closely at the telescopic piston, you'll notice it has two attachment points. And that's the giveaway. We need to rotate the piston, drop it down into the body of the generator, and hey presto, it now snaps in nice and neatly, but it does rather stick out here at the base, so we need to change its size. To do that, right click on the piston to bring up its context menu, and then use the scale marker to reduce its size. So let's reduce the size until the piston just disappears inside the body of the generator. So that's our first piston. Let's plant a second piston inside of that. So let's gently drop that one down again. Of course, we need to reduce its size. So let's right click, reduce it not to 0.64 but to one smaller than that, 0.512. And finally, let's get our third piston and drop that on the top of the second one. Repeating the exercise, we'll right click and reduce the scale, not to 6.4, not to 512, but finally to 0.410. And now if you look closely, you can see we have three pistons, one embedded inside the other. But how do these things work? Well, let's get up the robotics menu, the Infernal Robotics servo configuration menu. And it's created a default group and put all three of our pistons in that default group. Now we can change the name and just call that the post group. So we can name our groups that make them easier to identify if you have multiple of these Infernal Robotics groups of pieces of equipment. We can test the operation of the group as a whole using the move buttons. This is the extend and the reduce buttons, so you can see it working there fine. We've also got the same controls here on the individual pistons, so we can change the individual pistons if we so wish, if we wanted a particular height for a particular piston, and we can also reset the position of each piston in order to reset it back to its minimum position. Now there are some advanced settings if you really have some sort of complex automation going on. We can specify the minimum and maximum range of the piston, the speed and acceleration at which the piston operates. We can also invert the axis so it grows instead of shrinks depending on which operation we are using, and we can also apply that setting to all other objects with the same symmetry setting. But we're not going to do that. We don't need to use that for this very, very basic lighting rig. But what we do need to do is get some lights on top. Now, in the good traditions of these sorts of things, here's one I created earlier. We have some lights in this lighting sub-assembly. So let's just drop that here on top and head on out to the runway and just see if it works. Now it is broad daylight, so the lighting effects will be limited, but we can at least test our vehicle. So let's bring up the Infernal Robotics menu. The controls are very similar to those that we used in the assembly building. We have our post group and we have our three telescopic pistons with the standard set of controls we saw here earlier, accompanied by a lock servo button, which will prevent that particular servo from operating if you had some specific reason to do so. But we do have these two green buttons, and these are toggle move buttons that allow you to minimize or maximize the extension. So let's use the toggle move plus button to extend our post, accompanied there by some rather nice motorized sound effects. We can also use the minimize button to retract it back into the body of the vehicle, proving all in all these pistons are doing exactly what they said on the tin. Simple, effective, brilliant. Get your Infernal Robotics pistons today. Oh, and the lights work too.